What if the greatest threat to your faith was not suffering, not persecution, not betrayal, not even death? What if the greatest threat was silence, not your silence? God's. There is a kind of pain that people rarely talk about, a pain that doesn't arrive with violence. It doesn't announce itself with disaster. It doesn't shatter your world in a single moment. Instead, it creeps in slowly, quietly, patiently, like a shadow stretching across the floor as daylight fades. At first, you barely notice it. A prayer that goes unanswered, a question that receives no reply, a burden that remains despite weeks of pleading. Then weeks become months, months become years, and eventually a terrifying thought begins whispering in the dark corners of your mind. What if God isn't listening? Most believers never say those words out loud, but many have felt them. Many have wrestled with them in the middle of sleepless nights. And if they are honest, they know exactly how dangerous that question can become. Because faith often survives suffering, but silence can destroy people from the inside. And perhaps no one understood that better than David. When people hear his name, they immediately think of victory, the giant falling to the ground, the young shepherd becoming king, the songs, the triumphs, the miracles, the legend. But that version of David is incomplete, because hidden beneath the victories was a man who spent years fighting an enemy far more terrifying than Goliath, an enemy he could not see, could not touch, could not defeat with a sling, the silence of God. And there were moments when that silence nearly broke him completely. To understand David's struggle, you must first understand the world he lived in. Ancient Israel was not a place of comfort. Life was uncertain, dangerous, fragile. Empires rose and collapsed constantly. Enemies surrounded the nation from every direction. War was never far away. Famine could appear without warning. Disease could spread through entire communities. And beneath all of it lived a people desperately trying to believe that God still guided their future. David entered that world as a shepherd, not a prince, not a warrior, not a ruler, a shepherd, an ordinary boy spending long days beneath open skies, watching sheep, listening to the wind, sleeping under stars. Many people overlook those years, but perhaps they were the most important years of his life, because solitude shaped David before leadership ever could. Imagine him alone in the hills, night after night, far from crowds, far from applause, far from recognition. Only the sound of insects, the movement of animals, the vast darkness stretching across the landscape, and somewhere inside that silence, David learned to seek God, not because life was easy, but because there was nowhere else to turn. Perhaps that is why his Psalms feel so personal, so raw, so honest, because they were not written by someone observing faith from a distance. They were written by someone desperately trying to hold on to it. Long before he became king, long before history remembered his name, David was simply a lonely young man, searching for God beneath endless skies. And perhaps that is where faith often begins, not in crowds, not in success, but in hidden places, places where nobody sees your tears, places where nobody hears your prayers, places where the soul learns whether it truly believes. Then one day, everything changed. A prophet arrived. A message from God was delivered, and David received something almost impossible to comprehend. He was chosen, anointed, set apart, the future king of Israel. Imagine the emotions flooding through him: hope, excitement, wonder, fear, questions. Suddenly, life appeared filled with purpose. The future seemed clear. God had spoken. God had chosen him. God had a plan. And perhaps many believers know exactly what that feels like. The season when God feels close, when purpose feels obvious, when every prayer seems alive with possibility, when faith feels easy. But what happened next is where the story becomes truly unsettling. Because after the promise came silence, not immediately, not all at once, but slowly, painfully, unexpectedly. The giant fell. David became a hero. The people celebrated. Songs spread throughout the nation. Women sang of his victories. His future looked unstoppable. This should have been the beginning of blessing. Instead, it became the beginning of suffering. King Saul grew jealous, then suspicious, then obsessed, and suddenly the man chosen by God found himself running for his life. Think about how confusing that must have felt. God had chosen him, yet his circumstances were getting worse. God had promised him a throne, yet he was hiding in caves. God had spoken, yet heaven now seemed silent. This is where many modern believers struggle, because they assume obedience should produce immediate comfort, immediate clarity, immediate reward. But David's story suggests something different. Sometimes the moment after God speaks is the moment life becomes hardest. And perhaps that is exactly what makes silence so dangerous. Because silence often arrives after promise. It arrives after hope, after expectation, after faith has already begun growing. David spent years running, years hiding, years watching opportunities disappear, years wondering when God's promise would finally become reality, and every passing month created another opportunity for doubt. What if Samuel was wrong? What if the promise was misunderstood? What if God had changed his mind? What if the future David imagined would never happen? These questions may sound dramatic, but anyone who has waited long enough understands them completely. Because waiting transforms people. At first, waiting produces hope, then patience, then frustration, then exhaustion, and eventually, if it lasts long enough, waiting can produce despair. David was not merely fighting enemies, he was fighting uncertainty. And uncertainty is one of the most exhausting burdens a human being can carry. Because pain has an explanation, loss has an explanation, even suffering can sometimes be understood. But uncertainty leaves the mind trapped inside endless possibilities. Every day becomes another opportunity to wonder, another opportunity to question, another opportunity to fear. And yet, the Bible reveals something remarkable. David did not hide these emotions from God. He wrote them, preserved them, turned them into prayers. Listen carefully to the language found throughout the Psalms. How long, O Lord? Not why. How long? A question asked by someone reaching the edge of endurance. Someone who still believes, but is struggling to keep believing. How long will you hide your face from me? Those words are shocking in their honesty. This is not polished religion. This is not performance. This is not spiritual perfection. This is a wounded soul crying out from the darkness. And perhaps that honesty is exactly why David's story continues speaking to people thousands of years later. Because he was brave enough to admit what many believers feel, but rarely say. Sometimes God's silence hurts. Sometimes it feels unbearable. Sometimes it feels personal. And yet, David kept praying. That detail matters more than most people realize. Because the greatest evidence of faith is not praise during victory. It is persistence during silence. Anyone can worship when prayers are answered. Anyone can celebrate when miracles appear. But continuing to seek God when heaven feels closed, that requires a completely different kind of faith. A deeper faith, a harder faith, a faith forged in darkness rather than comfort. And David's journey was only beginning. Because the silence that troubled him in the caves would eventually lead him into an even greater test. A test that would force him to confront not only the silence of God, but the darkness within his own heart. And that darkness would change everything.